Welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we do have a doctor in the house from time to time, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing we say on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check in with a trusted medical professional about your own personal medical concerns.
Hello and welcome to Keto Life Support, episode 63 of the podcast. And this is Kim Howerton, and I'm coming to you today to talk about mistakes. Right? How often do people say, "Ooh, I had a whoops, I had a mistake, I had an accident, I had a cheat," right? And the language is all very much around, I don't know how this happened. Suddenly it just did. And I want to talk about that today. All right. Okay. So we all know, we've all said it. We've all heard somebody say it. You know, when we ate something that wasn't within the realm of things that we feel like we should be eating, right? With that idea that, you know, I am keto and keto falls under a certain set of rules. And under those rules, I have violated those rules by eating something outside of my approved list. Now, that could be a food item, that could be a quantity of food, depending on what your rules are, right? So it can really vary. Like what you might feel like was out of bounds for you might be totally in bounds for somebody else. It doesn't really matter. The details don't matter. The thing that matters is you violated one of your food boundaries and you are labeling it a mistake or some similar word, right? The concept is that it was not on purpose, right? Whatever word you use, mistake, cheat, falling off the wagon, fill in the blank. The word people don't use is choice, right? So think for a second about the difference between a choice and an accident, right? In much of the world, we would say they're very distinct, right? We see an accident on the road where one car ran into the other car, and we don't say, well, that was a choice. But I mean, you can kind of look at it in a way as a choice. You may have chosen when you're driving your car to change lanes, and you chose to change lanes when it wasn't a safe time to change lanes. And then you ran into somebody. So you had what we call an accident. But you know what? They don't call them accidents when you work in insurance. Little known fact, I used to be an insurance adjuster, right? When my first job out of college, I figured out who was at fault and how to compensate people for accidents, as we call them in public. But you know what we call them in the company? Collisions. Because two cars collided, it was never an accident. Now, you could always apply the word accident if you wanted to in some way, but there's always something that led up to it, right? There was always a choice somewhere. I can 100% tell you the times where the accident was truly an accident in the car world were incredibly rare. They tend to get called acts of God. Like you parked your car in a certain location and a lightning bolt hit it, right? Like, well, I mean, there was still a choice made. You parked your car outside versus inside and, things like that. But, at the same time, ultimately, you have to know what is in your control and what isn't in your control. And you have to manage those details. So I may have gone far afield with this. On today's show, we're discussing cars. No. But I think you get my point, right? The difference, though, I think what happens around the food stuff is that we tend to think if I don't call it an accident, if I acknowledge it was on purpose, right, that I did something on purpose, that I have to feel shame and guilt and ownership of that. And what I'm actually saying is it's the opposite. If you stop thinking of yourself as a victim to your food choices, you will gain a sense of confidence and agency that will transform the way you live your life.
Okay, I covered the overview on that. So if you're in a hurry, you can stop there. But I'm going to dive a little deeper into some of these things that I just discussed so that it might help really pull apart the threads for you. Because for a lot of us, this is hard. I mean, it's simple, but it's not easy, right? So let's go into the nitty-gritty a little bit more about understanding how important it is to conceptualize things as choices rather than accidents. So here we go. If we acknowledge our choices and at the same time separate that choice from a requirement to feel shame, guilt, bad, anything, right? We are acknowledging instead that we are adults. If you are listening to this podcast, you should be an adult. If you are not an adult, if you're a child, make sure you've checked in with your parents that it's okay to listen to this podcast and they're on board with it. And if you are an adult and you're listening to this podcast, as I hope most of you are, I would say you need to separate yourself from this child mind. What do I mean by that? Well, a lot of times in areas of high struggle, right? It could be any number of areas, but there tend to be these specific areas where emotion gets inflamed very easily. And food is one of those things. It's sort of a topic that maybe was an issue for you as a child, right? And as you were growing up, you developed this parent-child relationship, this push-pull around food. And we then maintain that parent-child relationship, but there's no parent any longer, right? So when we were a kid, if we wanted a cookie, we had to ask because the idea was, we were not someone that could be trusted to be in control of our cookie consumption. I mean, it was probably a lot rarer to have to ask if you could have something considered quote unquote healthy, right? Now, there were some households that were more controlling than others. I don't know what your household was like, but like in my household, I would ask if I could have a cookie because I knew the answer might not be yes. But I would never have to ask if I, say, wanted a piece of fruit, right? They were considered different kinds of choices. And so because of that, as a child, in my child's brain, I kind of inferred, well, one of these is good and one of these is bad. Of course, that means you want the bad all the time because that's just how it goes. But, when we now take that same push-pull into adulthood, it sets us up for this way of thinking that when we eat certain types of foods, we need permission, right? Like there's this non-existent entity that is our parent somewhere in our head. It's hard to wrap your head around, but if you feel into it, I think you'll recognize this feeling, right? That like almost as if, oh, I didn't have permission to eat that and I ate it and I was bad, right? Like it's infantilizing. It makes you more like a child in this relationship to some unseen entity. You have to break that up. You have to say, like, I am 100% in charge of my food choices. Now, because I am a devil's advocate, I like to say, I understand. There might be some days, some situations, you can't choose every single thing to be exactly the way you like it all the time. However, you are in charge of the choices you make. And sometimes your palette of choices, things you can choose from might be more limited or more difficult than others, but you're always in charge of those choices. You can choose at the very basic to eat or not to eat, as long as you're conscious and not in some intravenous feeding tube situation, right? So we are 100% responsible for our choices, and everything on some level can be construed as a choice. So when we just accept that as reality around food, it is incredibly freeing. I know it's like crazy talk, right? If I'm going to say responsibility is freeing, Most of us think the opposite. But when you are responsible for it, you can control it, you can master it, you get to make your own choices. That is all incredibly freeing. You are in control. Now, there's the control freaks among you. Be careful. But in this arena, this is very useful. And so when we start to really own, you take ownership of your choices, that's a huge burden. That's a huge weight lifted off of you in terms of your feelings of guilt and shame. So you're never allowed to say, I am responsible, therefore I feel shame. I mean, that's not useful here. You say to yourself, I am responsible, therefore I never need to feel shame on these choices because I chose them. I chose them. Now, we may determine that that choice was positive or negative with relationship to our goals, but you know what? That is no need for shame. That is simply a place that you can stop, evaluate, and move forward. So I made a choice, okay? Out of making that choice, I got some data. I learned something. I saw, okay, how did this choice affect me? Does that move me towards or away from my goal? Okay, I have some more data. I'm going to put that into my next calculation. I'm going to make my next choice, right? And so on and so on. And it is incredibly freeing because it is simply, we get information, we make choices based on our information, and we move on. It helps us better in the future, make better choices, and then we make another choice, and we make another choice. And you just keep going along that way. And you never have to fall into feeling like a victim to your food ever again. Now, I will say, as somebody that identifies as having a food addiction, this can be a really struggly subject because many times when we're somebody that is an addict, we would say that we don't feel like we have choice over our foods. But as someone who's been through recovery, I can say, even an addict always has choice, but sometimes an addict has to choose more strict rules and make those choices sooner because they can get into hot water faster. So an addict might make a choice all the way back at, I don't go into that store. I don't go to that restaurant. I don't go to these people's houses without taking food with me, right? The choice is being made much sooner. And the addict would say, I choose not to indulge in any of these behaviors in my sort of gateway issues, right? The trigger issues. I choose not to engage in those things because I know once I've triggered myself past that point, I will be on a roll that I find it impossible to stop. So, for some of us, that might be, I don't eat sweet things. I choose not to eat sweet things, right? I'm making a choice there to draw a very firm boundary because they have knowledge of themselves that a sweet taste, they're off the races in a way that they cannot accept the consequences of those actions. And so they make a choice there. Whereas somebody else might say, what's the negative repercussion of making a choice to eat a sweet thing, but that is considered keto? Well, I'm going to make a choice to have this keto dessert. What's going to happen? I've made this choice. This was my choice. I'm doing it. And then I did it. And oh, look, I was a little hungrier the next day. And I had to be stricter with myself the next day to say, no, don't eat those things. You're just reacting to the fact that you had that brownie and now you're wanting more, but you have the ability to say, no, I had it yesterday, but I'm not having it today, right? You can work with your brain. But maybe you made the choice, I'm going to have this keto brownie. And the next day you're like ravenously hungry and you just find it almost impossible for you to not have another one, and now it's 2, and now it's 3, and now you've opened 4 packages, and you're like, look, I made this choice. I got information about what happened when I made this choice. I am not willing to accept that being my step A to step B. I'm going to remove step A so I don't have to do step B again, so I don't have to deal with that. That choice was not worth the payoff. And so considering it a choice by saying to yourself, I've choice, and what happened? and then looking at what happens. Because maybe it's you have one and the next day you're fine and you didn't even notice there was a problem. No problem at all, right? So you don't necessarily know. You can make an educated guess based on knowing yourself, but you get this data and then you make your next choice and you make your next choice. And wow, maybe your choice is that you went out for, I don't know, pizza and beers, and it's certainly making non-keto decisions there. And then what were the repercussions of that? What were the ramifications of that? Are they acceptable to you, and under what circumstances? You get to make that choice as well. There is no keto police. They don't exist. There are certainly people that will make judgments about keto things, but there are people that make judgments about everything. Trust me, somebody judged your shoes today. Somebody judged everything, right? Do they matter? Not really, right? So move on, do what works for you. But by considering it a choice, you can say, I made this choice, and then what? And then what happened? And over time, you will exercise your muscle about making informed choices for yourself so that you can long-term find success and in a way that works for you and reaches the goals you care about, rather than just continuing to exist in this good girl, bad girl relationship with some mythical parent of food, right? I'm not saying your parents are mythical. I'm just saying like this sort of like food daddy, mommy thingy is weird. And it's so common, but we need to figure out how to be our own food adult. All right. So again, your language matters. I don't even like the word cheat. I'll use it occasionally because other people use it with me. I like the word choice. Now, if you say, I'm going to have a cheat meal, okay, let's reframe that. Be specific. I am choosing to eat XYZ on Tuesday night because it seems like a good idea. And then I've chosen this. This is a choice. And by using the word choice, you're sort of taking off the shackles of that weird relationship I just mentioned where like there's good, bad, parent, child, all that kind of stuff gets mixed up into it. I'm choosing this. That is an adult action. To choose something is an adult type of action. I'm choosing to do this. And then you get to look at what the results of that choice are. So this is just a very long-winded way to say, be careful with your language and make sure that you are the adult in your relationship with food. All right, guys, I'll see you next. Well, I won't see you. I'll talk to you next week. Have a good one.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Keto Life Support. Want more information? Want show notes? Want to suggest a topic? Just head over to ketolifesupport.com. That's where all that kind of thing can go on. By the way, I have a request. If you could go to your podcast host and hit subscribe, we would really, really appreciate it. And what would be even more awesome is if you could write a review. And what would be even more awesome than that is if you could write like a really flattering review. Just asking, you do you. All right. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm thrilled that you're part of the Keto fam. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.